Today I'm going to tell you 5 reasons why Google automatically will reject your resume. Make sure you avoid these mistakes and that you listen carefully what you do not want to do if you want your resume to get through to a Google recruiter or hiring manager. Let's get started. First of all, Google gets a lot of resumes every week. 50,000 resumes to be exact. And this is according to Laszlo Block, who used to be their SVP and of People Ops. He gave an interview to Inc. and also at Fortune magazine where he talked a lot about what type of mistakes people make in hiring at Google, and he quoted this number several times. This was a couple of years ago, so I gathered that this has gotten even busier now, especially in the current environment where a lot more people are applying for Google in particular. So with that many resumes that come in the door, Google has a couple of filtering techniques that they use right off the bat to thin out the herd and get candidates that they do not want to talk about out of the running. And today I'm going to cover the 5 most common ways that they do that. There are a lot of other things that they do when they filter resumes, but we will cover the 5 must-do things for you. Number 1, typos. Yes, it's definitely that simple, and typos happen all the time. In fact, if you apply for Google on their website, their ATS will filter out your resume and auto reject you if you have a typo. 50% of all resumes out there have typos. And typically, it's not the people who are not careful or sloppy, it's actually the people who are most careful that fall into this trap. According to Laszlo, people who tweak their resumes most carefully can be especially vulnerable to this kind of error. And he says it's because they often result from going back again and again to fine-tune their resume. So make sure that you read the resume closely. One tip that he gives is reading your resume from bottom to top. So he suggests reversing the normal order to help you focus on each line more. Or of course, something else we talk about at Candor a lot is make sure you have someone else proofread this for you, and you can pop that into our community at any time for someone to give you some feedback. Mistake number 2, and that one is just as common as typos, and that's sharing confidential information. Okay, well, maybe a little bit less common. It's 5 to 10% at a time. But Google will auto-reject these applications as well. And this is really important because, again, it is something that happens quite a bit. 10% of all resumes received at Google share confidential information. And this is an auto-reject, and it's also something that leaves an immensely bad impression. So, for instance, if you have access to information that you're under NDA for, or if it very clearly your other company doesn't want you to share, of course, it could be tempting to talk about that because maybe the project you were working on was strategic or important. But the way that Bach describes it is even without actually mentioning the name of the project, or sometimes even without mentioning the name of the company, he kind of knows you're giving away information you should not be giving away. And the major kind of point he makes in a lot of his interviews is that tells him as an employer that he doesn't want to hire you because he doesn't trust you with Google's trade secrets and those being shared to competitors. So this is incredibly, incredibly important here. Do not share any information that you do not want out there. And one way to kind of really look at rule of thumb, if this is something that you might fall into, is if you don't want this to be on the first page of the New York Times or the Information or Fortune or something, don't share it and don't put it on your resume. You would actually be surprised how often and how much resumes get passed around. So do not share any confidential info. All right, let's move on to the 3rd most common error on Google resumes that gets you rejected, and that is length. Google recruiters very strongly recommend 1 page and 2 pages max. Longer resumes are just not likely to be read, and therefore they are most of the time rejected. There are a lot of studies done on this, and recruiters will on average spend anywhere between like 6 and 15 seconds on your resume. Yes, that little. And so they certainly are not going to spend more on one candidate than they are on others just because your resume is longer. So being able to really tighten up the length is incredibly, and I mean incredibly important here if you want to get Google's attention. Issue number 4 is lying on your resume. And according to some studies of Inc., 26% of people under 40 admit to doing it. So it's very common. And 85% of hiring managers that were asked say that they found lies on resumes. And Laszlo talks about this a ton as the head of people operations at Google when he was in that role. So he talked a lot about how easy it is to verify this and how it really kind of marks you for the rest of your career, not just for your application with Google. So the way that he basically puts it is that lying even a little bit is very dumb because with internet research, you can pretty much verify everything. And some areas that he identified where Google very frequently finds people lying are first people's degrees. So for instance, if you're a couple of credits shy of a college degree, that's not considered a degree. Second area where Google finds a lot of people lying are GPAs. So if you kind of round up or round sideways, don't do it. There's no such thing as you doing it quote unquote accidentally, and you will be found out. Where you went to school, that's another major thing that Google really looks at. And so this is not something that you should fudge as well. And then the last thing is people will lie about kind of things like how long they were at the previous company, what their title was, or maybe how big the team was that reported to them, sales results, or things like that. The problem with that is it's actually very easy to get discovered, especially in tech where some of these circles are very tight and very small. So it's kind of very easy to kind of just do an informal reference call on you. And people who worked at your company in the past can reveal that you may not have been truthful. And Google is such a massive company. The chances are someone who did work at your company works there already. So it's not something you could really fly under the radar for. Another point here is even if you do manage to get in, you will have a lot of trouble getting ahead because this information at Google gets checked periodically. So not just when you are applying with your resume, but also after you've been at the job, these records get verified again and again at different periods of your career. So even if you get in, chances are you might get fired for it, so don't do it. And last really big mistake is bad formatting. So Laszlo here lays out some of the preferred formatting that Google really loves. So at least 10-point font, at least half-inch margins, white paper, black ink, consistent spacing between lines, columns, making sure that they're aligned, your name and contact information on every page if you end up doing a 2-page resume if you're a little bit more senior. And he really makes a lot of points in his writing around what exactly your resume should look like. And realistically, unless you are applying for a role that's more creative for some reason, you really should focus on readability. And if you need help with kind of fine-tuning your resume for Google, we have a ton of very helpful workshops and videos that you could watch for free. Make sure that you attend some of those and make sure that you take note of how to format your resume to impress Google. And some very technical things around formatting, definitely make sure you send a PDF because formatting can get really garbled when moving across platforms, and that could become a real issue. So there you have it. These are the 5 main tips on how to avoid getting auto-rejected by Google. This video was brought to you by Candor. We do salary negotiation for tech professionals. If you have an offer you're considering right now, whether it's from Google or from another tech company, reach out. You don't pay us anything unless we increase your salary. So let's take a look together at whether your offer is competitive.